Ambassador to the United States for India and Thailand as well, and High Commissioner of Bangladesh. There's a whole long list. I'm not going to read that out but clearly one of India's most best-known diplomats. He does have a link, in some senses, to Sikkim. He says he's just a hill away. Uh, he comes from Darjeeling, and his parents do have some ancestry, I'm told, to Sikkim in particular. And one of the things that we're going to look at in this is looking at the geopolitical positioning of Sikkim. And it does have neighbors right across, whether Tibet, Bhutan, China sitting somewhere around that side. What is your sense of the importance of Sikkim, and how can it prosper because of this particular geopolitical positioning that it has?
Well, thank you, Raj. And first of all, I want to congratulate the Honorable Chief Minister, people of Sikkim, for achieving this remarkable milestone of 50 years of the state's integration into India. And that achievement is not measured by time alone. I think that achievement, as we have understood also from the first session that you had with the Honorable Chief Minister himself, that achievement is born out of real results that the state has achieved in those 50 years. I also want to thank the India Today group for actually hosting this conclave on this special occasion. I think it's very important to be able to project what are best practices in our country, and I think Sikkim is definitely a case study of the success of our federal system. Coming to your question, of course, I think Sikkim is definitely on the geopolitical crossroads. It shares a border with China on its north and northeast. It also has a tri-junction with Bhutan and China on its east, and with Nepal and China on its west. So from a certain point of view, it's very, very much a part of the old trade routes that existed. It's also a part of the exchange of culture and ideas. And today, it is a vital link between mainland India and the Northeast, because Sikkim is your sentinel in the Himalayas.
Right.
That part of India that is so strategically important for maintaining contiguity between different parts of our country. So I think Sikkim is very well placed from that point of view. And Sikkim's success also, I think, can be linked in part to the fact that it is on this very important crossroads. I mean, you are at the point of trade, you're at the point of connectivity, you're at the point of infrastructure development, and you're at the point of, as I said, the exchange of cultures, ideas, and innovation.
Now, if you look at Sikkim's export potential, and given the fact that you have the other seven sisters sitting over there, if Sikkim considers itself as the brother of these seven sisters, the northeastern states, and of course you've served in Bangladesh. Of course, our relations with Bangladesh ain't that good as when you were there, and we've actually had their chief administrator, whatever Mohammed Yunus calls himself, talk about landlocked northeast and the importance. How does Sikkim therefore provide the gateway, as you call it, for not only its own exports, but also funneling the northeastern states and becoming, a conduit towards its growth and development?
So there are two aspects to this. One, of course, is infrastructure development. And I think infrastructure development is linked to Sikkim's own strategic importance. I mean, the fact that you have a huge investment in recent years, and I think the Honorable Chief Minister referred to that, in terms of road construction, in terms of infrastructure by way of the railways, and I want to elaborate a bit more on that Sivok-Rangpur line, which is now coming up. You have an infrastructure in terms of airfields, infrastructure in terms of basically ensuring that the supply lines that are there from the rest of India into the Himalayas represented by Sikkim is kept intact. So that's one part of it. And Sikkim, I think, has benefited greatly from that investment in our strategic priority.
Right.
But the other is that the people of Sikkim, under very able leadership of the Honorable Chief Minister and the political leadership, has been able to institute unique, I would say, initiatives that have made Sikkim the most prosperous state in India in per capita terms. I mean, the chief minister spoke about 7 lakhs per capita income.
Right.
That's an extraordinary achievement considering that you're a state which is not only landlocked, but you're a small state which is also in the Himalayan region. And I do recall one of the chief ministers of Uttarakhand telling me, former chief minister, that unless a Himalayan area, a hilly area has with it a plains with it, it does not have commercial viability. And Sikkim has proved that that is not correct. Despite not having plains attached to the hilly terrain that Sikkim represents, it's been very successful. And why has it been successful?
Right.
It has instituted unique scheme like organic farming. I think Sikkim is one of the few states that is 100% organic. Pesticides and fertilizers are not allowed. Farmers are actually getting far more income because the state is organic. They have perfected the art of high altitude floriculture. They have instituted ecotourism and sustainable tourism, which is the backbone of Sikkim's economy. They have hydroelectric power plants, I think, which you have a certain potential now, but the capacity is huge, and that's being, has not been exploited. It's in the process of being exploited. So I think Sikkim itself has taken steps, and innovation, sorry, that's very important. The young people in Sikkim, I think, have taken to innovation like nobody else. You recall in the G20, we actually scheduled
Yes.
a special meeting of the startup working group because of the innovation in Sikkim. You have startups in Sikkim that have actually made many, let's say, momentous developments in the areas of technology, digital communications, providing services. And I think from that point of view, it's also a state that has actually nurtured innovation. And some of the innovators are also here. So I think that's a great thing.
And let's not forget that Harsh Shringla was also the chief coordinator of the G20. Is that the designation that was there? Did a wonderful job, and let's give him a very warm round of applause for making India proud on this one. One of the things, Harsh, is India has an Act East policy. Earlier it was Look East, and under Prime Minister Modi it's become Act East. How can Sikkim benefit from this? What does it need to do to leverage its strengths, not only to act east, but if you take a look at its neighbors, Nepal, Bhutan, what can it do to really use that and leverage it and grow?
Well, the Act East policy is designed to allow us to focus on our neighbors, obviously to the east of us. I mean, that starts from Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and then goes on to Southeast Asia, Myanmar and beyond. And I think Sikkim is well placed because it has two friendly neighbors to the west and east. It's got Nepal on one side and Bhutan on one side. And what you have in terms of advantage is common linguistic, use. You have a common culture. You have, the advantage of, a spiritual connect with both these places. And I think the sort of people-to-people ties that you see between Sikkim and Nepal and Bhutan can be expanded also to the economic realm. How can we expand our economic linkages? How can we open up connectivity to parts of Nepal and Bhutan? And I think that is something that we could work on. I remember being in some delegations when I was looking after Nepal earlier.
That's right.
And you always had some representative from the government of Sikkim. And that connectivity worked very well because there is always a common affinity. And we should, as a country, use that strength that Sikkim has to open up connectivity to our neighbors to the east and west. Obviously, we cannot do it to the north, but certainly east and west is something that we can do. And we should not forget Bangladesh. We are going through, you're right, it is a difficult phase in our relationship. But when I was in Bangladesh, I remember that I had said that Sikkim is on a prior approval list for visas. In other words, you will not, as a foreigner, get a visa for Sikkim. At least as a Bangladeshi, you will not get a visa for Sikkim because it was on the prior approval list. And when Rajnath Singh ji was Home Minister, when he visited, I told him, I said, this is something that we can easily do away with because Bangladesh at that time was a very friendly country. And the potential for tourism in our Himalayas, Sikkim, Arunachal, etc., is tremendous. And he agreed. And within 3 months, Sikkim and Bangladesh was removed from the list prior approval category. And I remember going to Sikkim University as foreign secretary in 2020. And when I addressed the audience, that mainly students and younger people there, and I said, do you know why in 2019, tourism in Sikkim took a 90% upward swing? Not many students knew, but actually the reason was that we removed Sikkim from the restricted area list,
Okay.
and there was a surge of Bangladeshi tourists that went out to
Interesting.
Sikkim. So
Right.
you leverage economic potential wherever it is, and Sikkim can do it because Act East policy begins in Sikkim.
Wonderful. But let's also talk about the dragon in the room, Sikkim's big neighbor, the other side that's there. And what do you see as, as you look ahead? Of course, our relations have improved, given the past 5 years and the problems they had with them. Is there anything we need to look at in terms of what Sikkim could do and what benefits it could possibly get out, and what are the challenges and things that they need to watch out for?
Well, I think Sikkim's role is very important because it is like a sentinel in the Himalayas. And it's also different from other Himalayan borders that we share with Sikkim. And I'll explain why. One, of course, is that it's a more compact state. There is much better connectivity.
Right.
You have all-weather roads that can reach the border areas of Sikkim very easily. Compared to Uttarakhand, compared to Himachal, compared to Ladakh, Sikkim is much better off. Secondly, and I think this is very important when we talk about Sikkim at 50, is that Sikkim has achieved a remarkable level of political and socio-economic cohesion.
That's true.
This is a state that lives in harmony. This is a state that has achieved a remarkable level of development, and a state which, in many senses, is a living proof that good governance, national integration, infrastructure can make a success out of a neighboring state. So it becomes a model of success and integration as opposed to a state which is of peripheral concern, or a peripheral, a state which has concerns, a peripheral state with concerns. Let's put it that way. So take the case of, say, Manipur, for example,
Right.
which has it's a neighbor, it's a state that is a border state, but it has political issues. Jammu and Kashmir has had political issues. It's had issues which are, has issues which are linked to peace and stability and law and order as well. But Sikkim has none of these issues. So it is unique both from a geographical and infrastructure point of view, and unique in terms of its setting, in terms of political and socio-economic cohesion. I think the dragon in the room cannot be ignored when you talk about Sikkim, because let me remind you of Doklam in 2017.
That's right.
When we found that the Chinese were actually coming steadily south in Bhutan, of course, but steadily approaching a point where it would have been a serious strategic issue for us. And that is the time that we had to intervene. Many of us here would recall there was a standoff. We ultimately resolved the issue, but it reinforced to us the very, very important strategic nature of Sikkim, and that we needed to work to build our forward integration. And today you will find that a lot of effort is being spent on ensuring that you have stable supply chains, you have forward supply depots, you have the infrastructure necessary to equip our military in this area. And the railway, which I mentioned, the Sevok-Rongpo Railway, which is basically about 45 kilometers, but has 14 tunnels, which is very unique. 14 tunnels across the Himalayas, 22 bridges. These ensure that there is an assured supply to Sikkim and to our front lines, even when that road is washed away, even in times of conflict. And the value of 14 tunnels cannot be overemphasized at a time of conflict.
You have your ear to Delhi, and they have the ear to you as well. The advice that you give them, the Prime Minister and everybody else takes seriously. If you had to tell the center some of the things that, looking ahead, some of the sectors that the center must promote in this, they might be already doing it, but which are the 3 or 4 sectors that you would say, look, Sikkim is important. In terms of exports, we need to focus here. In terms of relationships, say as we discussed earlier with the East and the neighbors there, what would you advise, suggest to the center do on some of these things?
Well, you can give advice, but it's a different thing.
It's
That
free.
whether that advice is you know something which is relevant and useful.
But coming from you, it will be very important. Yeah.
But the important thing I think is that you know how do we reinforce uh, much of what Sikkim itself is doing. And I think the Honorable Chief Minister was very candid in saying that the support from the center, especially from 2014, has been very, very important in terms of Sikkim's overall development and growth. I think that is critical, and the Prime Minister himself has always emphasized on the Northeast in terms of development, with 10% of allocated budgets being available to the Northeast for its development. And Sikkim, in technical terms, is part of the Northeast because of the Seven Sisters and Northeast Council includes Sikkim. So I think from that perspective, I think some integrated planning is important. Integrating Sikkim not only with our other states, I mean, West Bengal, of course, to the south, but also Assam and beyond, and also to our neighboring countries of Bhutan, Nepal, and when the circumstances are correct, also to Bangladesh, because at the end of the day, Sikkim has tremendous hydropower potential. Today, you are exploiting, a fraction of it, but the potential is about 8,000 megawatts. I think 5,000 megawatts worth of power projects already in play, and that surplus power that is generated by Sikkim can flow through Bangladesh into the rest of India, because not only is that a much shorter route, but also Bangladesh can buy your power in a manner that is going to be of benefit to Sikkim. I mean, look at the Nepal example. When Nepal produces hydroelectric power, which is today being supplied to Bihar and UP, and Nepal has benefited enormously from that, and our states bordering Nepal have benefited also because of the fact that they are getting green power at a very, very reasonable rate. And that power is also going to Bangladesh. So how do you integrate the region? I mean, South Asia is one of the least integrated regions.
That's true.
And Sikkim is one of those points that you could use to integrate Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, maybe even Myanmar with our Northeast and the rest of India. So the potential is there. It's a question of how do you do that? And I think we've started with the railways, with the road infrastructure, with airports, additional, bridges, etc. There is a bridge that connects Pakyong with Kalimpong district. And that bridge is supposed to be the longest road bridge, over 1,000 meters. Wow. So these are the sort of things that, are going to help in that integration. And certainly, I think, when you talk about Act East, this is the sort of advice that you could put across.
Okay. We've got about 7 minutes, and I want you to do a little crystal gazing, because, as you said, the geopolitical or the geography of Sikkim plays a very vital role in the geopolitics of that region. And if you take a look at what is happening in Bangladesh, for instance, China to some instance, and Bhutan, of course, and Nepal, and the East, if you can just give us your perspective of the way things are going. Maybe relations are a little strained in some of these things, but how do you see it move ahead? And therefore, what should Sikkim look for and the opportunities it look for?
Well, Sikkim, as I said, I mean, being on the geopolitical crossroads is not entirely, I would say, immune to developments in our neighborhood. So developments in Nepal, in Bhutan, in the Tibet Autonomous Region of China, and even Bangladesh will impact directly or indirectly on Sikkim. And I've already mentioned, the linkages in terms of tourism, people-to-people contacts, etc. The situation in our neighborhood is one which is dynamic and fluid. We have a world today in flux, right?
That's correct.
Nothing is what you would presume it to be. And if I were to do some crystal gazing, I would probably get it wrong as to what would happen next.
That's okay.
Right?
We were not recording it.
I'm talking about
right
on a global basis.
That's right.
And that same applies to our own neighborhood. Our neighborhood today, I think, is not the same it was even 10 years ago. There is an enormous change. The change basically is that the larger powers are also getting more and more involved in your neighborhood. That great power game is coming to your immediate neighborhood, whether it is Nepal, whether it is Bangladesh, whether it's Sri Lanka or even Maldives, you see that playing out in your neighborhood. So nothing is what we would expect it to be, and things are changing very quickly. And I think we have to be able to take this in stride. In other words, we have to understand that there would be a constant process of changes in the dynamics. There is a situation where governments and dispensations are favorable to you.
Right.
They could be unfavorable to you suddenly. They could be back in favor. Take the case of Maldives.
That's true.
We were perceived to be close to the previous government of President Soli.
Right.
The next government that came on an anti-India, India outplank, led by Moizu. But today, that government is reasonably friendly towards us.
That's true.
So that dynamics can apply, and those dynamics, I think, are very important when you look at the neighborhood. The important thing for us is that foreign policy begins with your immediate neighborhood. That is why we call it neighborhood first policy. You cannot take your ball off your neighborhood. You need to focus on your neighborhood first, get it right first, and then get on with everything else that you have to work on.
Since you're here, how do you see developments proceeding in Bangladesh? They've been sort of troubling for us in many senses. What do you think would be, what do we need to look ahead for? Some of the challenges as well as the perceptions you feel?
Well, in Bangladesh, soon after the events that took place last year, in August last year, I'd written an op-ed piece in the Times of India in which I've said they've thrown the baby out of the bathwater.
Right.
So
Good point.
essentially, you have basically jettisoned an entire, let's say, ideology, a pro-liberation 1971 ideology, an ideology that believes in a secular constitution with a more harmonious, let's say, coexistence between the majority community and the minorities that are there in Bangladesh. Today, I think through the guise of what is seen as a student movement, the Islamists have come to power in Bangladesh, and they are the ones who are controlling the entire situation behind the scenes. I think Professor Yunus is the face of that particular dispensation. But you have a serious issue in the fact that these Islamists have an agenda which is not the same as yours, or in other words, it could even be inimical to your core security interests. Now, how you work on that and how you deal with that is very important, because Bangladesh is far more important than we allow ourselves to think it is.
Right.
And we share a 4,000-kilometer border with Bangladesh, the longest border we have with any country. It neighbors 5 of our very important states, including northeastern states. When Bangladesh is in ferment, it could really have an adverse impact on us from the point of view of ideologies, radicalism, and also terrorism. It could be, even as some of our seditious fear, a third front, which I think is the last thing that you want at this point of time. So you have to work on getting that sorted out. Nothing is beyond redemption, as I said, because in our neighborhood, things change very quickly. We don't have to have the same status quo that we are seeing now, but it needs a very urgent and careful attention to ensure that our, let's say, very, very important point geographically and strategically is not compromised in any manner to our detriment.
1 minute left. Quick word about Nepal and Bhutan, the same sort of perception.
Well, I mean, Nepal and Bhutan have been friendly states, traditionally friendly. We've had very, very special relationship with them that allows free movement of people, fairly free movement of goods. And I think in many senses, our countries, that's Nepal, Bhutan, and India, are quite interlinked in many senses. People work in India, many of our people work in those countries. There is a lot of scope to, I think, continue relations as it is, but you have to find the synergies. I think that's very important. I mean, I think the real turning point in our relationship with Nepal is hydroelectric power. Earlier, our model was different, which meant the state intervened, you set up hydroelectric power, and that was the basis of our relationship with Bhutan. You set up the hydroelectric power, you bought the power, you paid Bhutan. That model did not work in Nepal. But there is a new paradigm, which is that our companies are investing in hydroelectric potential in Nepal. And we have today, we are already importing, I think, 1,500 megawatts, if not more, of power from Nepal. But we have, I think, already invested in 10,000 megawatts worth of power from Nepal. But think of it, if that investment were to fructify and we would be getting 10,000 megawatts of green energy from Nepal, what would it do for Nepal's budget? What would it do for development in Nepal? What would it do to create an interdependency and a synergy that is very, very difficult to break? And this is, I think, very important. You get the economics right, you get the people-to-people connect right, everything else falls into place. And I think Nepal is important from that point of view. Bhutan, of course, we are working with them on the Gelefu mindfulness city. I think this is a new concept of a city, a smart city, a tech city, right on our border with Assam. I think there is a possibility of synergizing between Sikkim and Bhutan as well.
That's right. You could have a twin city of like Gelepu or whatever.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So there are many ideas out there, and we have to see how to best bring them to a success.
Harsh Shringla, we could have gone on with such rich experience. You brought great insights and clarity, and I think Sikkim will benefit greatly, and we have benefited. Let's give him a very, very warm round of applause for this. Thank you so much for being with us.